Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who cry behind closed doors, fight battles no one knows about, and refuse help even when they're drowning. Sarah Martinez thought independence meant never needing anyone. She believed that asking for help was a sign of weakness, that love meant losing herself, and that the only person she could truly count on was the reflection staring back at her in the mirror. But what happens when life throws you a curveball so devastating that even the strongest walls begin to crack? What happens when the very foundation of everything you've built starts to crumble, and the person you've spent your whole life trying to prove you don't need is the only one standing in the wreckage with you? This is the story of Sarah Martinez, a woman who spent 32 years building fortress walls around her heart, only to discover that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in standing alone, but in learning to let someone stand beside you. It's about the moment when "I can do this alone" meets "then let me be here with you," and how those 8 words can change the entire trajectory of a life. Some love stories are about finding each other. This one is about finding yourself through someone else's unwavering presence, even when you've convinced yourself you don't deserve it. It's messy, it's real, and it's about to unfold in ways that will challenge everything you think you know about strength, vulnerability, and what it truly means to let someone love you. Are you ready to witness a transformation that proves sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you don't have to do it alone? Sarah Martinez had always prided herself on being the kind of woman who didn't need rescuing. At 32, she had built her life like a carefully constructed tower, each brick placed with precision and purpose. Her corner office at Morrison & Associates law firm overlooked the bustling streets of downtown Seattle, where she could watch people hurrying to their destinations while she remained firmly planted in her own carefully controlled world. The morning of March 15th started like any other. Sarah arrived at the office at 6:30 sharp, her heels clicking against the marble floors in a rhythm that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. She had always been the first one in, and often the last one out, a pattern that had earned her the respect of her colleagues and the corner office she now called home. Her assistant, Janet, wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours, which gave Sarah the solitude she craved to tackle the mountain of cases that awaited her attention. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her younger sister Elena. "Coffee later? I have news." Sarah glanced at the message and typed back a quick response. "Busy today. Rain check." She didn't wait for a reply before setting her phone to silent and diving into the Henderson divorce case that had been keeping her up nights. The irony wasn't lost on her that she spent her days helping other people untangle their lives from partnerships that had gone wrong, while she herself had never allowed anyone close enough to create such complications. 3 floors below, in the building's coffee shop, David Chun was having what he would later describe as the worst morning of his year. The espresso machine had broken down during the morning rush, leaving him to explain to increasingly irritated customers why their usual caffeine fix would be delayed. As the building's newest tenant, having just opened his small bookstore cafe 6 months ago, he couldn't afford to lose customers, especially not the lawyers from the upper floors who had become his most reliable morning clientele. David had noticed Sarah before, of course. It was hard not to notice someone who moved through the world with such determined purpose. She ordered the same thing every morning: large black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and always had exact change ready before he could even ring up her order. Their interactions were brief and professional, but something about her intrigued him. Maybe it was the way she never quite made eye contact, or how she seemed to carry the weight of the world in the set of her shoulders. When the repair technician finally arrived and restored the espresso machine to working order, David found himself thinking about the woman from the 15th floor who hadn't come down for her usual coffee. He had no way of knowing that Sarah had been so absorbed in her work that she'd forgotten about her morning routine entirely, living off the emergency instant coffee she kept in her desk drawer for exactly these kinds of days. Sarah's concentration was broken by a knock on her office door. Her paralegal, Marcus, poked his head in with an expression that made her stomach tighten. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about the Morrison merger documents." She looked up from her computer, noting the unusual gravity in Marcus's voice. "What about them?" Marcus stepped fully into the office and closed the door behind him, which immediately put Sarah on high alert. In 3 years of working together, He had never felt the need for such privacy during their discussions. "There's a problem with the financial disclosures," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I was doing the final review for tomorrow's filing when I noticed some discrepancies. Numbers that don't add up, transfers that seem to have been backdated." Sarah's blood went cold. The Morrison merger was the biggest case the firm had handled in years, and it was her case. She had been the lead attorney, responsible for every detail, every document, every signature. "Show me." For the next 2 hours, they pored over the documents together, and, with each passing minute, the situation became clearer and more devastating. Someone had been manipulating financial records, creating false trails to hide what appeared to be embezzlement on a massive scale. The worst part was that all the evidence pointed to Sarah herself as either the perpetrator or, at best, criminally negligent in her oversight. "This can't be right," Sarah muttered, running her hands through her carefully styled hair. "I reviewed every single document personally. I would have caught this." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, I've been thinking about this, and there's something else. Remember when you gave me access to your computer last month when you were in court? Your passwords, your digital signature authorization." The implication hit her like a physical blow. Someone had used her access, her credentials, her reputation to commit fraud, and now all the evidence would point directly to her. Her career, her reputation, everything she had spent her adult life building, was about to come crashing down around her. "We need to call the senior partners immediately," she said, reaching for her phone. "Sarah, wait." Marcus's voice stopped her. "You need to understand what this means. Even if you're completely innocent, and I believe you are, the optics are terrible. Your name is on everything. Your access codes were used. Your digital signature authorized the transfers." She sat back in her chair, the full weight of the situation settling over her like a suffocating blanket. "How long do you think we have before this comes to light? The filing is due tomorrow. Once the SEC gets these documents, they're going to start asking questions. Maybe days, maybe weeks, but not long." Sarah had always been a problem solver. It was what made her good at her job, what had earned her the respect of her peers, and the success she enjoyed. But, as she sat in her office, staring at the evidence of her professional destruction, she couldn't see a way out. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly helpless. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed her mother's number, and Sarah almost ignored it entirely. The last thing she needed right now was one of her mother's well-meaning check-ins about her personal life and her continued single status. "Hi, Mom," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sweetheart, I'm so glad I caught you. Listen, I know you're always busy, but I wanted to invite you to Elena's engagement party next weekend." The words took a moment to register. "Elena's what?" "Oh, honey, didn't she tell you? She and James got engaged last night. I thought for sure she would have called you first thing this morning." Sarah remembered the text message from her sister that she had brushed off earlier. The news she wanted to share over coffee. The coffee date that Sarah had dismissed because she was too busy, too focused on her work, too convinced that her cases were more important than her family. "That's wonderful news," Sarah managed, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'm very happy for her. Are you all right, dear? You sound a bit off." Sarah looked around her office, at the law degree hanging on her wall, at the awards and recognition that had once filled her with such pride, at the life she had built so carefully and was about to lose so completely. "I'm fine, Mom. Just a long day at work." "You work too hard, sweetheart. You need to find some balance, maybe meet a nice man, settle down like your sister." Any other day, Sarah would have deflected this conversation with practiced ease. Today, the words hit differently. "I need to go, Mom. We'll talk soon." After hanging up, Sarah sat in the growing darkness of her office, not bothering to turn on the lights as the sun set outside her windows. The building had grown quiet around her, the usual bustle of daytime activity giving way to the peaceful emptiness of evening. She thought about Elena's engagement, about the coffee invitation she had declined, about all the moments she had missed because she was too busy building a life that was apparently built on quicksand. Her computer chimed with an email notification. It was from David Chun in the coffee shop downstairs. "Hi, Ms. Martinez. I noticed you didn't come by for your usual coffee today. I hope everything is okay. I saved you a fresh batch of those blueberry muffins you mentioned liking last week. Stop by whenever you have a chance. David, Sarah stared at the message, surprised that anyone had even noticed her absence, let alone cared enough to reach out. She had been so focused on maintaining her professional relationships that she had never really considered the smaller, more human connections that existed in her daily life. The barista who remembered her order, the security guard who always nodded good morning, the cleaning lady who left little origami flowers on her desk, people who had been there all along, invisible to her in her single-minded pursuit of success. She looked out her window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, Elena was probably celebrating her engagement, surrounded by friends and family who loved her. Somewhere out there, people were going home to partners who cared about their day, to families who provided comfort and support. And here she sat, alone in her office, facing the biggest crisis of her life with no one to turn to and no one who would even notice if she simply disappeared. For the first time since Marcus had delivered the devastating news about the merger documents, Sarah felt tears threatening to overwhelm her. She had always prided herself on her strength, her independence, her ability to handle whatever life threw at her. But as she sat alone in the growing darkness, she began to understand that there was a difference between being strong and being alone, and she wasn't sure she knew how to be one without the other. The realization that she had spent 32 years building a life that could collapse so completely, so quickly, and leave her with nothing and no one to catch her fall, was perhaps more terrifying than the professional disaster itself. She had always believed that needing other people was a weakness, that depending on anyone besides herself was a dangerous vulnerability. Now, faced with a situation that was beyond her ability to control or fix, she was beginning to question everything she thought she knew about strength. As the night deepened around her, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She gathered her things, locked her office, and, instead of going home to her empty apartment to agonize alone, she took the elevator down to the coffee shop on the 3rd floor. The closed sign was already up, but she could see David inside, cleaning up for the day. She knocked gently on the glass door, and when he looked up and saw her, his face broke into a smile that was so genuinely warm it almost undid her completely. He walked over and unlocked the door. "Ms. Martinez, I was wondering if you'd get my message." "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Call me Sarah." And, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she walked into a space where someone had been thinking about her, waiting for her, caring whether or not she showed up. It wasn't much, but in the wreckage of her carefully controlled life, it felt like the first solid ground she had touched all day. David noticed immediately that something was wrong. Sarah's usual composed demeanor had cracks in it, and her hands shook slightly as she accepted the coffee he offered her. He didn't ask questions, didn't push for explanations. Instead, he simply made her the best cup of coffee he could and sat with her in the quiet of his shop, offering the kind of presence that asked for nothing and gave everything. "Thank you," Sarah said eventually, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking him for. "Anytime," he replied, and somehow she believed he meant it. As Sarah sat in the warm, coffee-scented sanctuary of David's shop, surrounded by books and soft lighting and the kind of peace she hadn't felt in years, she began to understand that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face whatever was coming entirely alone. It was a terrifying thought for someone who had spent her whole life believing that independence was the only safety, but it was also, for the first time in a very long day, a hopeful one. The next morning arrived like an executioner's axe, swift and merciless. Sarah had managed only 3 hours of restless sleep before her alarm jolted her back to the harsh reality of her situation. The merger documents had to be filed today, and she knew that once they reached the SEC, her world would begin its inevitable collapse. She dressed with extra care, choosing her most confident suit, applying her makeup with precision, styling her hair until not a strand was out of place. If she was going to face her downfall, she would do it looking like the successful lawyer she had worked so hard to become. The armor of professional appearance was all she had left. David had left another message on her phone sometime after midnight. "I hope you're okay. Remember, you don't have to carry everything alone. The coffee shop opens at 6 if you need a quiet place to think." Sarah stared at the message, surprised by how much comfort those simple words provided. In her entire adult life, she couldn't remember anyone offering her sanctuary without wanting something in return. The gesture was so unexpected, so purely kind, that she found herself getting dressed earlier than usual, hoping to stop by the shop before the day's disaster fully unfolded. When she arrived at the coffee shop at 6:15, David was already there, preparing for the morning rush. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "You came," he said, and there was such genuine pleasure in his voice that Sarah felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "I shouldn't be here," she said, though she made no move to leave. "I have a terrible day ahead of me." "All the more reason to start it with good coffee," David replied, already preparing her usual order. "Want to talk about it?" Sarah almost laughed. The idea of explaining her situation to someone she barely knew, someone who had no stake in her professional life, seemed both impossible and somehow appealing. "You wouldn't understand. It's complicated legal stuff." "Try me," David said, handing her the coffee. "I might not know law, but I know what it looks like when someone's world is falling apart." There was something in his tone, a quiet understanding that suggested he spoke from experience. Sarah found herself studying his face more carefully than she ever had before. He was probably around her age, with kind eyes and an easy smile. But there was a depth there, a kind of quiet strength that spoke of someone who had weathered his own storms. "Someone at my firm has been embezzling money from client accounts," she heard herself saying. "And all the evidence makes it look like it was me." David's expression grew serious. "Was it you?" "No," Sarah said immediately, then paused. "But I was responsible for overseeing the case. Either I was incredibly negligent, or I was set up. Either way, my career is over. What are you going to do?" It was such a simple question, but Sarah realized she had no answer. For the first time in her life, she didn't have a plan, didn't have a strategy, didn't have a way forward that she could see. "I don't know," she admitted, and the words felt like a defeat. "That's okay," David said gently. "Not knowing what to do next doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're human." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her law firm's main number, and her stomach dropped. It was barely 6:30 in the morning. No one should be calling this early unless something catastrophic had happened. "Sarah?" "Thank God." Marcus's voice was strained when she answered. "You need to get here immediately. Mr. Morrison is here, and he's furious. Someone leaked information about the merger to a financial blog. The story goes live in an hour." Sarah's coffee cup nearly slipped from her hands. "What kind of information?" "Everything. The embezzlement, the falsified documents. Your name is mentioned specifically. Sarah, they're saying you're the primary suspect." The world seemed to tilt around her. Sarah gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself, and she was dimly aware of David moving closer, his presence a steadying force in her peripheral vision. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she managed to say before hanging up. "Bad news?" David asked softly. Sarah laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. "The worst. My professional reputation is about to be destroyed publicly, and I still don't know who did this to me or why." She gathered her things, moving with the mechanical efficiency of someone in shock. "I have to go. I'm sorry for dumping all of this on you." "Sarah, wait." David's voice stopped her at the door. "Whatever happens today, remember that this doesn't define who you are. You're more than your job, more than this one situation." She looked back at him, this man who barely knew her but seemed to see something in her that she had forgotten existed. "I don't think I know who I am outside of my career." "Then, maybe," David said gently, "this is your chance to find out." Sarah carried those words with her as she walked into what felt like a war zone. The law firm's lobby was already buzzing with unusual activity. Reporters had somehow gotten wind of the story and were waiting outside the building. Security guards were stationed at every entrance, and the usually calm atmosphere of Morrison and Associates felt charged with panic and anger. Mr. Morrison himself was waiting in the conference room, his face red with fury. Beside him sat 3 other senior partners, their expressions ranging from disappointed to openly hostile. Sarah had worked for these people for 8 years, had helped build their firm's reputation, had sacrificed personal relationships and personal time to make them money. Now they looked at her like she was a criminal. "Sit down, Sarah," Mr. Morrison said, his voice ice cold. We need to discuss your immediate future with this firm. For the next 3 hours, Sarah endured the most humiliating professional experience of her life. She was questioned, accused, and treated like a guilty party rather than a valued employee who might herself be a victim. The firm's position was clear, whether she was guilty or not. She had become a liability they couldn't afford. We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package, Mr. Morrison said finally, in exchange for your immediate resignation and a signed agreement that you won't discuss this matter publicly. Sarah stared at the documents they placed before her. A severance package that would support her for maybe 6 months, and a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent her from defending herself publicly. In exchange, she would quietly disappear, allowing the firm to claim they had taken decisive action while protecting their reputation. You want me to sign away my right to clear my name? She asked. Sarah, be realistic, said Patricia Wells, one of the partners she had considered a mentor. Your name is already all over the financial blogs. By noon, it'll be in the major newspapers. Whether you're guilty or not, no reputable firm will touch you after this. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Everything Patricia said was probably true. Even if she eventually proved her innocence, the stain of this accusation would follow her for years. Her carefully built career, her professional identity, her entire sense of self was being erased with brutal efficiency. I need time to think about this, Sarah said. You have until 5 o'clock today, Mr. Morrison replied. If you haven't signed by then, we'll have no choice but to terminate you for cause, which means no severance and a very public dismissal. Sarah walked out of the conference room on unsteady legs. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before her, and she could feel the stares of her colleagues, some sympathetic, others suspicious, all uncomfortable. She made it to her office and closed the door before the tears finally came. She had built her entire adult life around being successful, being respected, being the kind of woman who could handle anything. Now, sitting in her office surrounded by the awards and accolades that suddenly seemed meaningless, she felt more lost than she had ever felt in her life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Saw the news story online. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over? The offer of support should have been comforting, but instead it filled Sarah with shame. Elena was supposed to be celebrating her engagement, planning her wedding, enjoying one of the happiest times of her life. Instead, she was worrying about her sister's public humiliation. Sarah typed back, I'm fine. Enjoy your engagement. We'll talk soon. It was a lie, but it was easier than admitting that she wasn't fine, that she was drowning, that she had no idea how to navigate this disaster. Around noon, Marcus knocked on her door. How are you holding up? I've been better, Sarah said, trying for levity and failing completely. Marcus sat down across from her, and Sarah could see the guilt written across his features. Sarah, I've been thinking about this all morning. The timing of when I discovered the discrepancies, the way the information leaked so quickly. I think someone wanted this to be discovered now, in this way. What do you mean? I think someone orchestrated this entire thing. The embezzlement, the timing of the discovery, even the media leak. Someone wanted to destroy your reputation specifically. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Who would do that? And why? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. This isn't right, Sarah. You're one of the most ethical lawyers I've ever worked with. Someone set you up, and I'm going to prove it. The loyalty in Marcus's voice was overwhelming. Sarah realized that in focusing so intensely on her professional success, she had overlooked the relationships she had built along the way. Marcus had been more than just her paralegal. He had been her partner, her supporter, someone who knew her well enough to believe in her innocence even when the evidence suggested otherwise. Marcus, you need to be careful. If someone is powerful enough to orchestrate this, they won't hesitate to destroy your career too. Let me worry about that, he said firmly. Right now, you need to focus on protecting yourself. Are you going to sign the severance agreement? Sarah looked out her window at the city below. Somewhere down there, David was probably serving coffee to customers, creating a warm space for people to find comfort and connection. She thought about his words from that morning. You're more than your job, more than this one situation. I don't know, she said honestly. If I don't sign, I lose everything and have no income while I try to fight this. If I do sign, I lose everything anyway. But At least I can pay rent while I figure out what to do next. There's a third option, Marcus said. Fight. Don't let them silence you. Don't let whoever did this win. With what resources? With what support? Marcus, I don't even have a lawyer. I can't afford to hire someone good enough to take on a case this complex. And no one will take it on contingency because the chances of proving my innocence are so slim. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What about David? Sarah looked at him in confusion. What about David? The coffee shop guy? I've seen the way he looks at you, Sarah. And I saw how you looked different yesterday after you went down there. I know you think you have to handle everything alone, but maybe you don't. The suggestion seemed absurd. David was a kind stranger who had offered her coffee and a sympathetic ear, not a solution to her professional crisis. But even as she dismissed the idea, she found herself thinking about the way he had listened without judgment, the way he had offered support without asking for anything in return. He barely knows me, Marcus. So, sometimes the people who know us least see us most clearly. You've spent so many years building walls, Sarah. Maybe it's time to let someone behind them. After Marcus left, Sarah sat alone with his words echoing in her mind. She had always believed that strength meant independence, that needing others was a sign of weakness. But, as she faced the biggest crisis of her life, she was beginning to understand that maybe true strength lay not in facing everything alone, but in being brave enough to let others help carry the load. At 4:30, 30 minutes before her deadline to sign the severance agreement, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. She walked down to the coffee shop, where David was cleaning up after the afternoon rush. I need help, she said when he looked up, and the words felt like both a surrender and a victory. Okay, David said simply, as if people walked into his shop every day asking for help with career-destroying scandals. What can I do? I don't know, Sarah admitted. I don't even know what kind of help I need. I just know that I can't do this alone anymore. David studied her face for a moment, then walked over and locked the front door, turning the sign to closed. Then, let's figure it out together, he said. And for the first time in days, Sarah felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone after all. David made 2 cups of coffee and led Sarah to a small table in the back corner of his shop, away from the large windows where curious onlookers might peer in. The afternoon light filtered softly through the space, casting everything in warm, golden tones that made Sarah feel like she was sitting inside a sanctuary rather than a coffee shop. Start from the beginning, David said gently. Tell me everything. So Sarah did. She told him about the merger, about the falsified documents, about Marcus's discovery and the media leak. She told him about the ultimatum from her firm, about the choice between signing away her rights or losing everything. As she spoke, she found herself sharing details she hadn't even told Marcus, fears she hadn't acknowledged even to herself. David listened without interruption, his attention so complete and focused that Sarah felt truly heard for the first time in longer than she could remember. He didn't offer quick solutions or empty reassurances. He simply listened, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. So you have to decide in 25 minutes whether to sign the agreement, he said when she finished. Yes. And I honestly don't know what to do. Both choices feel like giving up, but I can't see a third option. David was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Can I ask you something? What would you tell a client in this situation? The question caught Sarah off guard. What do you mean? You're a lawyer, right? You've probably represented people who were facing impossible choices. What advice would you give them? Sarah considered this. I would tell them not to make any irreversible decisions under pressure. I would tell them to buy time to investigate, to gather allies, to explore all their options. And how would they buy time? Sarah felt something click into place in her mind. They would file an injunction. They would claim the company was retaliating against a whistleblower. They would. She paused, looking at David with new understanding. You're not just a coffee shop owner, are you? David smiled, but there was something sad in his expression. I used to be a corporate lawyer. Burned out completely 3 years ago after my wife left me, and I realized I'd missed most of my daughter's childhood chasing partnership at a firm that never really valued me. This coffee shop is my second act. Everything suddenly made more sense. The way he had listened so intently, the questions he had asked, the understanding in his eyes when she described her situation. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed someone to listen, not someone to give you legal advice. And because I wanted you to trust your own instincts, not just take my word for anything. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude so intense, it almost overwhelmed her. What would you do? In my situation, I would refuse to sign that agreement. I would make them fire me, document everything, and then I would fight. But, Sarah, that's easy for me to say. I'm not the one who would lose everything. I've already lost everything, Sarah said, and as the words came out, she realized they were true. My reputation is destroyed, my career is over, my colleagues think I'm either a criminal or incompetent. What else is there to lose? Your integrity, David said quietly. Your right to tell your own story. Your chance to prove the truth. Sarah looked at her watch. 15 minutes until the deadline. If I refuse to sign, I'll need a lawyer. I can't represent myself in something like this. I might be able to help with that, David said. I still have contacts in the legal community. People who specialize in employment law, whistleblower protection, that kind of thing. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Sarah felt tears threatening again. Why would you do that for me? You barely know me. David was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft but certain. Because everyone deserves someone in their corner. Because I've been where you are, not the same situation, but that feeling of being alone against impossible odds. And because sometimes helping someone else is the best way to help yourself heal. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a wall cracking that she had spent years building. I don't know how to let people help me. That's okay, David said. We'll figure it out as we go. At exactly 5 o'clock, Sarah walked back into the law firm and handed Mr. Morrison a letter she had written by hand on coffee shop napkins. I decline your offer of severance, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I am innocent of any wrongdoing, and I will not be silenced or forced to accept responsibility for crimes I did not commit. If you choose to terminate me, I will file complaints with the State Bar, the Department of Labor, and any other regulatory body that has jurisdiction over this matter. Mr. Morrison's face turned red. Sarah, you're making a serious mistake. Without our protection, you'll be destroyed by this scandal. Maybe, Sarah said, but at least I'll be destroyed on my own terms. Walking out of the building that had been her second home for 8 years should have felt devastating. Instead, as Sarah stepped onto the sidewalk and felt the cool Seattle air on her face, she felt something unexpected, relief. For the first time in days, she had made a choice based on her values rather than her fears. David was waiting for her outside the coffee shop, and when he saw her expression, he smiled. How did it go? I think I just committed professional suicide, Sarah said. But I feel better than I have in days. Good for you, David said, and his pride in her was so evident that Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Come on, I want to introduce you to someone. He led her back into the coffee shop, where a woman in her 60s was sitting at one of the tables, a stack of legal documents in front of her. She looked up when they approached, and Sarah was struck by the intelligence and kindness in her eyes. Sarah, this is Rebecca Martinez, no relation, despite the name, David said. She's one of the best employment lawyers in the city, and she's agreed to hear your story. Sarah looked between David and Rebecca, overwhelmed by the gesture. I can't afford to hire someone of your caliber, she said honestly. Rebecca smiled. David has already explained your situation, and I'm interested in taking your case on contingency. What you've described sounds like a classic setup job, and I love nothing more than exposing corporate corruption. For the next 2 hours, Sarah told her story again, this time to someone who asked sharp, probing questions and took detailed notes. Rebecca's expertise was evident in every question she asked, every angle she explored. This is definitely actionable, Rebecca said finally. The timing is too convenient, the evidence too neat. Someone wanted you to take the fall for this, and they did a good job of setting it up. But they also made mistakes, and we're going to find them. What's the next step? Sarah asked. We file a wrongful termination suit first, along with a whistleblower complaint. Then, we start investigating. I have a private investigator who specializes in corporate fraud. He's expensive, but he's worth it. About the expense, Sarah began, but Rebecca held up a hand. David has offered to cover the investigator's retainer, she said. He seems to have a lot of faith in